Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Frontline Club. Just a quick message that we're waiting for our chair. He's on the tube. He'll be here in about 5-10 minutes. Journalists. Hello, everyone. Apologies for the delay. Welcome to the Frontline Club. I'm not going to waste much more time, but just to let you know, this event is being live streamed this evening, so and feel free to tweet live from the event as well. It's so great to see a lot of you here tonight. It reflects how important this report and this topic is. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ben Webster, Environment Editor for The Guardian, to kick things off.
Just one small correction. I'm actually Environment Editor of The Times. In my dreams, it will one day be The Guardian. I'm very sorry that I've actually kept everyone waiting. Late-breaking story. Actually, following up a Guardian story, funnily enough, about the resignation of the UN Environment Chief. Anyway, but we're here now. I've written a lot about plastic in the last year, far more than I've written in sort of 5 years before about that issue. It seems to have exploded onto the public consciousness for various reasons, partly to do with sort of media companies deciding to make it a campaign, which is great. I mean, you know, if virtue signaling by media companies results in more attention to environmental issues, that's a wonderful thing. And you actually saw in Blue Planet 2, even though it wasn't the BBC actually who first drew attention to this issue, they picked it up, and then it seemed to reach a really mass audience. And I noticed that when I speak to people about what I do, sadly, very few people ever ask me or express any interest in talking about climate change. This is at parties. This isn't. I'm not talking here about in my work, but people do talk about single-use plastic, disposable plastic, and how they really hate it. They don't like it. They think it's causing terrible damage to the oceans. Now, if you ask me that, what is it causing terrible damage to the oceans? I would say there is limited evidence so far. It's certainly not doing them any good. We seem to have reached a consensus that we ought to do something about this problem. And I thought this study that we're here to talk about and debate the findings of and the proposals that it contains today was very interesting, because the Environmental Investigations Agency and Greenpeace challenged the major retailers to say what they were doing to reduce their plastic consumption, and then it attempted to rank them. And we can come on to whether that ranking or the sort of headline ranking that they did was fair or not. I've got a couple of questions about that myself. But first of all, we're going to have a quick summary of what the report. I don't know how many of you have actually read it, but there was some newspaper coverage and media coverage last week. But let's first of all get a quick summary of what the report actually found from Sarah and Catherine. Sorry, Elena. Sorry.
Yeah. This is Catherine. Fine. So hi everyone. I'm Eleanor from Greenpeace. I'm an ocean plastics campaigner there. So Ben's been talking about just the huge awareness about the scale of ocean plastic pollution. Wherever we look, we seem to find it, whether that is at the bottom of the deepest trench of the ocean, whether that's in Arctic ice, in the Antarctic off the coast of Scotland, in the shells of mussels today. There was a story about a dead sperm whale off the Indonesian coast found with 1,000 bits of plastic in its stomach, couple of 100 or so plastic cups, bottles, etc. And plastic production is set to quadruple, unchecked, up to 2050. And globally, only around 9% of plastic has ever been recycled. So we just keep adding and adding and adding to it. So supermarkets, why we focused on them? Well, the grocery retail sector is the largest user of single-use plastic packaging in the UK. And so we went out with EIA earlier this year, sent a survey to the 11 biggest supermarkets by market share and other retailers, grocery retailers that have over 1,000 stores, to be able to reveal the full extent of their contribution to our plastic waste problem and to reveal the actions they're taking to tackle it. These are huge players. They have huge influence and they have huge impact. And I guess the headline from our report is that together We know that they put over 810,000 tonnes of plastic packaging on the market every year, and just 7 of them sell 59 billion pieces of plastic packaging every year.
Hi, I'm Sarah from the Environmental Investigation Agency. So you've got a copy of the league table in the leaflets on your chairs, and you'll see it's a league table of low scores. Supermarkets really aren't stepping up on reducing plastic, and they're not moving fast enough on eliminating non-recyclable plastic either. So over half of the supermarkets have no plastic-specific reduction target, and with the exception of Iceland, those that do, have only committed to eliminating 5% or less per year. So that's 20 years to eliminate throwaway plastic from their shelves. We simply don't see that this meets the scale of the ocean plastic problem. And EIA and Greenpeace are calling on retailers to set ambitious year-on-year reduction targets and to commit to eliminate non-recyclable plastics by the end of 2019.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to introduce, we're going to get into questions in a minute, but Catherine Conway, who is from Unpackaged. Could you tell us a little bit about your initiative?
So I set up Unpackaged, which was the world's first zero-waste grocery back in 2006, so that was 12 years ago. And I think for about 10 out of those 12 years, everyone thought I was crazy. But finally, everything changed with Blue Planet. So we don't have our own shops anymore because we're trying to work with other businesses to scale up. I spent a lot of time saying I'd never work with a supermarket, and then I realised the only way we were ever going to solve this problem is by working with the supermarkets. So I'm working very closely with one of the people on this list who I'm not allowed to talk about. And I guess I'm really interested in the how we do this. Like, we've got ourselves into this problem of single use, and I'm really interested in the how we get ourselves out of it from a really practical store level approach. So hopefully I can bring a bit of perspective of what people are doing.
Brilliant. Could you just, Sarah, could you just explain briefly that in the press release and in the sort of the league table that you produced, Iceland came top, which I found quite surprising, and Co-op, which I know have done a lot of very good things on reducing single-use plastic, and particularly hard to recycle plastic. Like, they took the initiative on getting rid of black plastic meat trays, which are difficult to detect by recycling systems. But they appeared fairly low down. So could you explain how that came about?
Absolutely. So Iceland came out as a top scorer. They're really pioneering in having adopted a commitment to phase out single-use plastic packaging from their own brand range, which goes far beyond any other commitment adopted by other retailers to date. They're also performing well on eliminating non-recyclables. So in scoring the supermarkets, we looked at the action they were taking on reducing their plastic footprint, on eliminating non-recyclable plastics, supply chain actions, and also on their transparency in responding to the survey. Co-op have done a lot of historic work on reducing their packaging, but have no plastic-specific target going forward. And they've made good progress on recyclability, and that is reflected in their score under that aspect. But we weighted scoring particularly highly for reduction commitments because we see that reduction is a huge part of solving the plastic pollution crisis.
Could you just tell everyone, people might be wondering actually why there isn't a representative from the retailers here?
Yes, absolutely. We did invite virtually all the major retailers to participate. Unfortunately, none of them accepted. So
that's very disappointing.
Yeah.
In terms of what the solutions are, I mean, there is the WRAP Plastics Pact, and that has some ambitious commitments in it. They are all, I think nearly all of them have set targets for year-on-year reductions in their use of single-use packaging. So there seems to be quite a lot happening. What do you think the answers are?
So I think the WRAP Plastic Pact has been a great forum for bringing together supermarkets to discuss issues. It's very much focused on the recyclable part of the picture and not less so on reduction. So there aren't any quantitative reduction commitments under the WRAP Plastic Pact, which is really part of our reasoning for establishing this survey, for setting out our asks on reduction, because we want to see that retailers go beyond looking at recyclability. That's an important part of the picture, but also to really look at reducing the amount of plastic they're putting on the market. So in terms of solutions, and Catherine can speak to this as well, we see a lot of work still to be done on removing unnecessary packaging to looking at refillable packaging ranges to reduce their plastic footprint.
I think it's also good to add, just in terms of, so just for people that don't know what PACT is, it's a voluntary industry commitment with a timeline of 2025 that I think companies that represent about 80% of the packaging on supermarket shelves have all signed up to. And it's a number of targets, 3 or so, and most of them do focus on, and their reach only extends as far as improving recyclability. So the problem that we have with that is that you could quite easily meet that target while actually increasing the overall volume of single-use plastic packaging that you're producing every year. So it is something that could have huge potential because, of course, when it comes to retailers, when it comes to plastic packaging, a collective effort is definitely going to be required. And a lot of the challenges that retailers face, as places that sell and produce single-use plastic, they're the same. They face the same challenges. So that forum, could become, much more effective. And I think, and also to acknowledge that we're only at the very start of fixing an enormous problem, like the plastic waste one. So we would just really urge the pact's signatories to make a concerted effort on reduction and also bring forward some of the deadlines that they've set themselves, especially around non-recyclable plastic. So our survey found that the nearest deadline that any retailer has set itself for just taking the non-recyclable plastic packaging off the shelves is 2022. And we're calling for that to happen much faster than that. We want supermarkets to pull out all the stocks.
Is that's the Co-op, is it?
No, that's Marks and Spencer's and Aldi. Is that right?
Definitely Marks and Spencer's and possibly Waitrose, I think, is the second.
I think Waitrose is 2023.
Right.
Co-op's 20, yeah.
23 is the Co-op.
Yeah. Co-op, yeah.
So you identify in the report that 810,000 tonnes of single-use plastic is placed on the market by the retailers. So that's include their own brand products and the brands that they sell. How many tonnes would be an acceptable amount?
Well, I think ultimately we're trying to shift. We're trying to have a total rethink on plastic packaging. So, ultimately we want to see that figure plummet at the moment.
To what? I mean, Iceland has said they want to get rid of it altogether for their own brand, but that's easy for a frozen food company. Or easier for a frozen food company to do. But how much would be acceptable? Given we've got a growing population, so, we're going to have 10 million more people in 20 years' time, and that plastic is a very hygienic, light, simple way of packaging food. So,
yeah, just on that, obviously,
Right.
plastic has enormous benefits. That's why it just took off. Cheap, hygienic, light, malleable. You can use it for various things. But the cheapness is also sort of slightly constructed and misleading because it's only cheap because it doesn't take into account the full costs of what happens to it. And you've got the fact that in the UK, the taxpayer councils pay 90% of the cost towards dealing with it, and actually producers and manufacturers only pay 10%. So it's sort of a free ticket. When actually it's important to sort of recognise that.
Well, Michael Gove has indicated he's going to deal with that issue, how far he goes in making the people who place the packaging on the market pay for the recycling of it. As you say, they only pay roughly 10% of that cost at the moment. But supposing they were to be required to pay nearly all the cost, could you then say, any of you, how much plastic packaging would be acceptable? Is any plastic packaging acceptable, first of all? In the long term?
I think there are some uses of plastic that you could deem to be pretty essential, especially when it comes to medical use. But a lot of the plastic packaging that's used for food is also there because it's used for promotion. It's used to shift a lot more over the till because you bagged it up and you can't take one, you have to take 3. So it's not, for me, it's not so much a question of how much is acceptable, more that at the moment the onus, the responsibility isn't there for producers and manufacturers of problems. So only when manufacturers, producers of plastic packaging are handed back responsibility for that product, that's when you're going to unlock innovation, because you're going to have to.
Okay. Sarah, do you have a view on whether plastic packaging is some level of plastic packaging is acceptable for food?
So I think what we have to look at also is if we can demonstrate a closed loop for that plastic packaging, and having things in place like deposit return schemes where we can demonstrate very high collection rates, then for those particular items we might say plastic packaging is okay to be used for those, where we can show that it's not leaking into the environment and it's not having negative
environmental. So that's the core,
environmental
is it?
impacts.
It mustn't leak. It's not so much the plastic packaging, it's what happens to it after it's been used.
Yeah.
Right. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's possibly the wrong question. I mean, I understand why you're asking the question, but I think it's we need a whole systemic change. So we need consumers to consume differently, and we really have to question this consumption model where it's endless consumption, endless sales, endless on the go. You've always got to eat, buy, consume. Retailers, manufacturers have got to take responsibility, whether they're going to choose to do that or be forced to do that. And then we need regulation and taxation. And all together, we have to solve this problem. And everyone's going to have to take responsibility for where their bit is. I'm not saying this is easy, but I just think when the miracle of plastic happened and it did all of these wonderful things and it got women out of, being chained to the kitchen and blah, 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 all of the things that we got, we just didn't think far enough in the future. We weren't able to think far enough in the future about what this problem was going to be with all of the plastics everywhere. And it's now we have the awareness of it, whoever created it, whatever the light bulb moment was with Blue Planet, we now have an awareness and everybody is going to have to play their part for this systemic change. But I think what I get frustrated with is with the Plastics Pact is it's very industry led, with wrap and plastic. Like all of the questions when you came and you showed me the draft survey, I was like, this should all be publicly available information. It affects all of us. We're all paying for it through our council tax. And actually, funnily enough, the work that I'm doing with the supermarket has been accelerated by the fact that you've come along and said we're going to do a public scorecard, because they're like, oh Christ, we've all got to get our houses in order. So I think, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think it is that big systemic change we're looking for, and it's not going to be immediate.
But
and I think we're open about the challenges as well. I mean, one area where you just think that's a big challenge is, for example, meat packaging, where a lot of it is packed, and that's an issue of food hygiene, and for example, but. So it is a granular picture, but a lot of the plastic packaging, and we've had this back from supermarkets responding to the survey, will admit that there is excessive packaging. And, that can be removed, and that's why reflected in our ask around yearly reduction targets is accepting the challenge, the scale of the challenge, some of the complexities, but also that there are some sort of quicker wins there, because there is excessive packaging, there is pointless packaging, there is unnecessary, complicated plastic packaging. And supermarket shoppers have been the first to sort of expose this, whether it's on social media, whether it's the cauliflower steak, shrink wrap coconut, etc.,
But it is only now that, I sort of feel a bit sorry for the retailers in some respect, because it is only since Christmas that actually consumers have said, no, we want something different. Before that, it was all convenience. And I know they've just spent a lot of money marketing the concept of convenience to people, but it's very hard it's such a competitive landscape that it is really hard for them to make bold choices to do something different or be the first person to do that without seeing a clear reason as to why.
Is there evidence that people are actually using these alternative methods? Because some of particularly Morrison's, allows people to bring their own containers.
Yeah, Morrison's, Waitrose and Tesco's all allow you to bring your own containers too.
Did you ask them how that's going? Because Morrison's has been doing that for about a year that I'm aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be continuing to kind of build those case studies. They're very much doing research with their customers to ask about the response, to gather customer feedback, to also look at other issues that may come up as part of those trials. So we're seeing a very kind of fine scale attitude towards it and are really trialling things first and piloting initiatives. And we just want to see that progress expanded across a much wider range of supermarkets and accelerated over the next year.
There doesn't seem to be any reason why they all couldn't do that, at least as an option.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the success of the plastic bag charge that has seen over 80% drop in the use of those single-use carrier bags is testament to actually the ready adaptation that customers will make to options that makes going plastic-free easier. And we sort of see the sort of measure that some of the supermarkets are exploring around bringing your own containers, for example, using reusable containers, are an extension of that, which like, as a customer, finally there is an option for me to avoid plastic, and it's not, it's something that the supermarket is facilitating. So the call is very much for, looking for leaders in retail to be, pushing forward with these sorts of initiatives. And Morrison's is one that's done some trials.
Do you think, obviously some people will they'll want to reduce the amount of plastic packaging they take from the supermarket. They'll remember to bring their own containers with them. But should they be rewarded in some way, or flipping that around? Should people who insist on taking home their food, their goods, in single-use plastic be penalised in some way, be charged for that? Because this report is very much focused on the supermarkets, but it's us who use the supermarkets. There's 60 million of us, and the figure that really struck me was that the average household buys 2,000 items of plastic. This is about people making decisions.
Well,
it is actually quite easy to buy loose fruit and vegetables from most major supermarkets if you want to do that.
But it's often more expensive.
Right.
And
fair point. So in other words, what do you think it ought to be?
So in a way, you're
more
penalised for
expensive?
taking the plastic-free
the wrong way
option.
around,
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of this is stemmed from, is that it's actually very, very limited choice for you as a consumer, and these, we hope that these sorts of initiatives are the thin end of the wedge, where there actually be opportunities for retailers to really run with some of this stuff. And
I think what we've seen with the plastic bag charge as well is that having that economic incentive does force people to change their habits. We've seen a huge drop in the number of plastic bags used, and we know that with some of the reusable initiatives that retailers are rolling out, that they're looking at how they can incentivise those, usually through kind of reward points and those kind of actions, but again, looking at how they can incentivise customers to make the right choice.
I'm going to throw it open to people to ask questions and make points in a minute, but could we just, one of the other things that is imminent is a consultation by DEFRA on a deposit return scheme. I've possibly detected a slight change in the language about that, because Michael Gove originally said containers of any type of container, and he actually said whether it's aluminium, glass or plastic, they may be thinking about dropping the glass, I don't know, or there may be a limitation on the sizes because the industry is lobbying, it wants to be on the go. Anyway, what do you feel about that, about a deposit return scheme? Maybe all three of you. What do you think? Do you think that? Do you think do you think there should be a scheme, and how comprehensive should it be?
Yeah, Greenpeace has been campaigning for a deposit return scheme. The idea behind it is that you ascribe value to something that has previously been deemed as useless. Actually, the sort of plastic that plastic bottles are made from is one of the most recyclable sorts of plastic in terms of its quality. These schemes are tried and tested all over the world. The best ones collect up to 90%, 95%, I think, of plastic bottles. In the UK, I think we lose out of the system about 16 million a day. So these schemes are a great way to do that. But we also want an all-inclusive scheme. So I think you need to have as much material going through it as possible. And this idea of, which I think you alluded to, Ben, that it would only be certain sizes, is really sort of, it's a bizarre idea, because actually all sorts of sizes and types of containers are found in the environment, are found washed up on beaches. A big bottle is going to do just as much damage to wildlife as a smaller bottle. that distinction isn't made anywhere. It's a false one. So we need to make sure that it covers all materials of all sizes, and that it's a system that's really convenient for us to use. So that, you know, it's uniform across the UK. It's something that Scotland is slightly ahead on in terms of consulting for.
So all drinks bottles of any type of material on all sizes.
Yeah.
Drinks bottles. And do you agree with that?
I think the really good thing about deposit return schemes is that you get very clean materials out at the end. So one of the problems is that all of our plastic is mixed up, so it's really hard to get out the kind of good recycled plastic that you would want. So we've now got, so the budget was the potential tax on anything that has less than 30% recycled plastic. The problem is we don't have enough of that nice clear recycled plastic of which to make the...
So you'll get very clear waste streams from these machines because they can segregate the types into...
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to me, it's not a real deposit return scheme, because to me, a real deposit return scheme is reusing the bottle. So think to the glass milk bottles. I'm not saying it just has to be glass, but it's actually getting the material back for reuse. So what we're doing with the English one at the minute is assigning a value to a recyclable material so we can recycle it, whereas I would like the next stage to be, I don't think that's the end game. I think the end game is deposit return systems that reuse things.
Reuse the actual bottle.
Reuse the actual
like
bottles.
what used to happen,
Like what
basically, in
used
the
to happen,
70s, you know,
yeah.
Corona bottles.
But it's not looking back. I think the future of tech solutions is really exciting. So I think let's not think that this is all going back to scooping things out of sacks and really old-fashioned ways. You know, we've got smartphones, we've got apps, we've got new delivery models, we've got all of this clever technology that can help us manage reusable packaging systems, whether it's coffee cups or packaging. So for as long as we're going to keep it to a customer has to bring their own container, we know that the percentage of people that bring their own coffee cup to a high street chain, I mean, it's sub 5%. It might even just be 0.5% or something like that. It's a very low figure. And if we're just going to rely on customers having to bring
1 or
their
2%, I think, with Starbucks and Russell
Yeah,
would
it's
say,
really
yeah.
low.
It's tiny. It's tiny. Yeah.
But if in 5 years' time you could go into somewhere, maybe less than that, 2 years' time, you could go into somewhere and you could take something off the shelf that was in reusable packaging, that was tracked, that was related to your loyalty card. That's the exciting bit. So I think we need to think of this as the forward-looking thing. That's something that fits in with people's modern, convenient lifestyles. I mean, I think we should all consume a bit less, but within that, you know, I do recognise that people do need to go and buy things from shops.
Yes. What do you say to the family who are assiduous recyclers? They have as nearly all local authorities do, collect plastic bottles. I think all but 2 collect plastic bottles now. What you're saying to them essentially is that rather than you'll have paid something, maybe 10p, maybe 20p, on top of the price of that bottle. If you you could put it in your household recycling, but you're sacrificing that money, basically. So what you need to do is put it in a bag, queue up at the supermarket until such time as the reverse vending machine is free and working, and stand there, depositing it in, and then getting your deposit back. You think this is a good idea?
I don't work a lot on the DRSs for that.
Right.
I presume it's going to be cleverer than that. That there's
Right.
going to be more than one
Oh, is it?
DRS in a town.
Yeah.
But there is a very real problem that if you suddenly start taking all of that stuff out of council's waste stream, then they start losing income based on what. So there's deeply complex.
This is incredibly
systems.
efficient, actually. If people will only recycle properly in their homes, it's actually a very efficient way of getting that material
It is,
back.
but it's not their fault that they don't know how to. Like, I'm an expert, and I can't tell the difference between films, laminates, materials. You know, at the minute, your only solution as a consumer is to just not buy it.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, and I think let's stop focusing on bottles. Like, there's so much other plastic
yeah.
that it's not just bottles. It's all of the ready meal trays and.
What about deposits on ready meal trays?
Well, that's what people are looking at. You know, people, and also like the rise of Deliveroo and all of that. I mean, I know we're talking grocery retail, but people consume food in lots of different ways now. So there are going to be lots of interesting models of how to get that food to them. So our challenge is always, can you get this food or product to the customer with no packaging? That's the challenge.
Right. Great. Well, we're going to throw it open now. And so if anyone has a question or wants to make a point that we haven't really covered properly yet.
If you just make sure you
gentlemen,
speak into the microphone here. Not there.
And there'll be a microphone coming round. Thank you. And then the gentleman behind.
About 15 years ago, I met a man on holiday who was retired from the packaging industry, And I've always been quite kind of green, and so we got talking. And he said that they had found ways to make packaging for fruit, vegetables, all these things that get, and meat, that was biodegradable and compostable and not a problem at all. And he was so frustrated because he'd retired, and all these things that they could do hadn't been able to happen because they cost a bit more than plastic, and so none of the supermarkets had wanted individually to take the risk of running something that was going to be more expensive and for the consumer, and that the only people who were using them were in the finest ranges and the taste the different ranges and things. So those sort of stupid cups they make that you can put 2 avocados in, they can be made recyclable and or biodegradable and not a problem at all, but it wasn't happening. So he
There's a lot of conflicting claims about biodegradable plastics.
Man.
I know that a lot of
here because
right.
That's about all I know about it. But he knew what the substances were, and
but it's still the case. I mean, it's if you want to swap something out for a sustainable material, it's 2 to 3 times the price. And we know that packaging, when it goes into an AD plant, is all being screened out. So people are trying really hard to do it. Everyone thinks they're doing okay with their compostable coffee cup, but if you do what you're meant to do with it, which is put it in your food waste, it's still going to be screened out and probably incinerated. So it's a false solution.
On the questions about how biodegradable some of this plastic is as well, I mean, whether actually about how long it takes to biodegrade.
What conditions it needs. If the eventual fate of so much of it is in the environment, in salty water, that's not the conditions that it needs to biodegrade. There are other sorts of bioplastics which can refer to what that material is made of or how it breaks down. That, for example, need extreme heat. And the fact is that we already have, an established waste system that is really overwhelmed already. That this sort of thing would add complexity to, add contamination to. And it's a like for like replacement. It's swapping one single use sort of packaging for another single use sort of packaging. And especially with some of these materials, there's no sort of universal third party independent standard. So it's just a sort of proliferation. It's sort of layers of complexity upon layers of complexity. So it's approach with caution, and then there's the price element too.
Thanks, Ben, Sarah, Catherine, Eleanor. 2 points, please. First of all, would you all agree? What do you think about recycling being basically a siren call? It's not about recycling; it's about reduction. And for reduction, the 5p charge resulted in 6 billion less plastic bags in one country in 1 year. So surely the way for behavioural change is to start taxing and charging, which will then change our consumer behaviour. So the question is just, is it a siren call, recycling? Discuss, please. And secondly, is there any immediate thing that you could suggest in the way of taxation or charging that would have an effect on reduction?
It is a good point. I mean, you've come back to the plastic bag example, and everyone talks about this sort of stunning success it was. The thing is, I was told by retailers who initially fought it, Tesco fought like mad to stop it. And then when they realised it was going to happen, they decided to embrace it. But they said that actually they'd done surveys with their customers and they found that most people actually had bags in the boot of their car. They just forgotten to bring them into the store. And therefore they just took those bags that were freely available. It's actually quite an easy thing for people just to remember. They just needed a very small price signal to remember. It was so easy to do. We've all got loads of bags for life, bags we get given for various reasons. So I'm not sure that actually it's going to be as easy to get rid of the packaging as it was to get rid of the bags. But anyway, sorry, your question was whether recycling is a siren call. Actually, we ought to be focusing more, and it's distracting attention from the need to reduce plastic use and materials use.
Yeah, I'd say we very much agree that we can't recycle our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. There's no system around the world that can currently cope with the volume of single-use plastic that we're producing and consuming. And we're seeing countries around globally adopting tougher and tougher restrictions on what they'll import and recycle plastic waste. In the UK, we've only got around 30% of our plastic packaging that's actually collected and recycled, and then about 2/3 of that is exported overseas. And then once that's been exported, we don't really have any systems currently in place that have oversight over how much of that plastic is ultimately recycled, or the working conditions involved. So we see problems with plastic being illegally dumped, with very poor working conditions involved in the sorting and processing overseas as well.
Yeah, we're very, very clear that you can't recycle way out of this problem, and that we have to tackle this problem at source, and that means we have to reduce how much plastic we're making in the first place. I think we often talk about the analogy of your bathtub's overflowing, and what do? How do you respond to that? Do you sort of get a little cloth and dab around the edges? Do you close the door? Do you just say, oh, sod it, I'll make the kitchen downstairs into a wet room? Or do you like roll up your sleeves, get in there and turn off the tap? And that's why our main call and our main demand when it comes to retailers and companies is that you need to reduce your plastic footprint, and you need to be doing that year on year, and you need to start by getting rid of the excessive, the unnecessary, the non-recyclable plastic, because recycling is basically just slowing down the process before it gets to landfill or it escapes into the environment, because plastic can't be recycled indefinitely. It's much cheaper just to make new stuff out of virgin plastic. So what we need to do is if we're going to have this sort of this vision of a circular economy, then it needs to be a much simpler, smaller circle. So reduction, absolutely.
So, and Catherine, do you think we're entering a time when people have felt for years good about themselves? I recycle, I'm a good person. Do you think actually that's no longer going to wash in the future?
I don't think it can. I think that was what happened with Blue Planet, because you can't make a series about the oceans without seeing everything that's in there. And I was just reminded of someone that told me that on the places that we export a lot of this rubbish to for recycling, I mean, we are thinking it's being recycled and it's not. And there's something called the smell test. So you get all these children who work in informal economies on rubbish tips, and they all have a lighter, and they basically, to tell what type of plastic it is and what to do with it, they hold it up and burn it and smell it. So if you want to live in a world where 5-year-olds do that, that's the price of our culture over here. But I don't know what the solution is. I think the question about taxation and regulation is really important. I think there is a massive chunk of people in this country who can afford an extra 5p, 10p on their food. I don't know what the solution is for people who can't. We have a massive problem with food poverty in this country, and that has to be addressed. We can't all sit here in our nice metropolitan elite going, hey, this is great, let's just rise the price of food. We know what happens when food prices rise and people can't afford it. So I think that is a real problem. And I don't know how we reduce the amount of packaging when our entire culture is built on selling more. All of these businesses, they can't turn around to their shareholders and say, so we've just decided that we're going to sell 20% less products this year because we want to cut our packaging habit, because it's just, I don't know what the solution is.
So are you more concerned about people consuming than people using packaging?
That's the bigger thing. Climate
Right.
change is the bigger thing.
Right.
We've got a problem with plastic packaging, but we have a problem with car tyres and microfibres and all of the other problems of plastic, which are problems of consumption.
Right. So you think we're sort of spending time focusing here on a symptom of the problem, really? It's not really the
I think
big
we
issue?
have to do both. I don't think we can sit here and go, this isn't the big issue. This
Yeah.
is the big issue, and it's a very
Certainly the
visible
issue that's
and-
commanded all the attention.
Yeah, because people
But-
feel guilty. They all have the bin paralysis. So that I don't know what to do, and I feel really bad about myself, and that's just no way to live.
Okay. Great. We'll get some more questions. The gentleman here, and then we'll go to the gentleman there, and then come over here.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine, you probably wouldn't want to be equated with him, but I mean, would you say that Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si is exactly what you're going on about? That we need a profound change in the way society organises itself. That's just one question. But the other one is, I do realise that you're all at one talking about attacking the source. What's your view about big companies now which are investing a lot, like Plastic Energy, where they are actually converting plastic into a new energy source? I mean, I know that's not the solution, but do you think that's maybe helping things?
Sorry, what are you referring to? Converting waste to energy, so incineration plants. Is that what you're talking about?
They claim to be turning it into a more environmentally friendly energy, but I don't know if you know anything about this plastic energy company. It's a British company investing quite a lot in the south of Spain, and they're raising a lot of money for it.
I think there is a risk of at least increased incineration in the UK, and I think that the main problems that we have with that is that it emits harmful greenhouse gases and other types of air and ash pollution, but also that it locks in. It keeps it doesn't challenge that cultural aspect of this at all, because it says, oh, actually we need a lot of feedstock, so let's make even more of it. Oh, good, the plastic production forecasts are looking nice and healthy, so that's great. And so I think that's why our emphasis is on tackling it at source, and that the way to do that is that is a role for government. Now, government does need to step in, like it needs to step in and rationalise household collection for recycling, but it needs to step in desperately on reduction targets and create those levers that make sure that companies are able and actually incentivised to choose far more sustainable choices.
I think it's also important to remember where plastic comes from, and that's from oil extraction. So if we're locked into that cycle of continual plastic production and escalating production, we're also locked into escalating climate impacts from that production and extraction.
But I mean, you've raised the issue of tax. I mean, the dreaded B word. But I mean, if we get away from European environmental legislation, I mean, do you trust Mr. Gove?
Trust Mr. Gove. I actually sat next to Michael on the Times News Desk 20 years ago.
He's doing well on plastics. I'll give him that. I feel like he has taken it, whether it's just because that's what everyone's into at the minute, and next year it'll be something else. I mean,
I think he's done well on consultations of plastic, and there's been a lot of warm words, and just making sure that actually gets translated into the legislative change that we think needs to happen, and that isn't delayed too much. And there are plenty of moments to prove that coming up in the near future. So, and hoping that it doesn't just stop with a consultation on straws and stirrers, which is really a much smaller part of a big problem.
I think this is why it's so important that you're holding them to account. If you hadn't done that work, the whole industry-led commitments, just by nature of being industry-led.
But having said that, I know that it's almost fashionable to sort of scoff at banning microbeads, banning straws and stirrers, but actually, isn't that's what you want, isn't it? That's actually saying you don't use it. It's not like make it recyclable. No, you don't actually need it, and you can't have it anymore. They're banned.
No, it's just important to sort of to consider it as part of a bigger picture. And I think the microbeads ban was hugely important when we're talking in terms of cultural shifts. It was this moment of realisation of sort of, how did this happen? There is plastic in my shower gel. What kind of a design flaw is that? And that was one of the first sort of kicks of momentum around the plastic issue, and it's become this much bigger, much more evasive, everywhere insipid problem that I think anyone had imagined. And in a way, it had been in front of our eyes all the time. So it's just that yes, and
okay,
yeah.
We'll get some more questions. So the gentleman here, and then over there.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. My question is about the supply side. So with two recent examples, at my workplace, I looked into the price of the price of paper cups, that's it, as opposed to plastic cups, and it was twice the price. So quickly we decided not to go down that route at this stage. Hearing a radio report recently about one of the first paper straw manufacturers in the UK, in Bolton, and that's been set up recently in response to the Attenborough documentary. They're now going great guns, so the impetus has started from there. So I suppose my question is on the supply side. Do you see, perhaps looking at Scandinavia or in Germany, which tends to be 20 years in front of us, are there any lessons from those countries that we can take on board?
We've talked about the deposit return scheme that they have, which accounts for sort of 90%, gets 90% back. But are there other things that we can learn from what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of examples like straws and so on, we're very much hoping that retailers, cafes, so on, will implement steps that, so it's not a one-for-one substitution of a plastic straw for a paper straw, but there's really, that they make their customers think about, do I actually need that straw, that stirrer, that spoon, and so on. And we also know with regards to price, yes, it's often a problem at the start because the demand hasn't been there up to this point, but that when that demand is there at scale, that the price per unit really drops in terms of comparing plastic to a paper straw.
What's your business? Who do you work for?
Well, it was a body that hosted conferences and events, so we were using lots and lots of cups.
And can't you change them to reusable cups?
I think that was the other option we looked into as well. So you're right, it forces you to start to think in a bit more of a creative way.
Well, it's about being creative, but it's also about understanding that you're then spending loads of money on waste removal. So you've got a massive waste contract that you're now having to pay. So if you were to remove some of that investment in the waste, you could probably afford the reusable cup. So it's sort of such a massive issue, but then it actually comes down to very simple decisions. It's just about who's within the business that can think through and who can support you to think through those and actually question things. So instead of just saying, oh, well, we can't swap our plastic to paper, you need someone coming along saying, well, can't you just get rid of them? It's that kind of challenge.
Yeah, I'm in the privileged position of being sent reusable plastic cups by different companies to think I might write about them. I have a look. I've yet to come across one that you can actually keep clean or get back to its original state. These are heavy duty plastic cups that are reusable, of the type you might be able to take into Starbucks and get your 25p discount if you're that way inclined. What do you think to that? I mean, I think actually there might be an issue there once we start requiring people to use these. It's actually quite hard, especially if it's my cup. Okay, it looks a bit grimy, but it's only me drinking out of it. I don't mind. But if you're going to an event and someone's offering you, hey, would you like this reusable cup? It looks a bit dirty, but trust us, it's all right.
They're never going to do that. You go to a pub and you use how many people are having a glass? Like,
well, yeah, but that's glass, isn't it? I mean, pubs use glass. Yeah.
But that's just design. That's just good design and good process to make the plastic work. I mean, they have a use life. So even people who have reusable cup systems know that I think it's 132 uses per cup. So what you've got to do is get that usage up to the point that justifies the materials and then work out a circular end of life for it. But I think everything can be solved by volume, efficiency, good design, and willingness.
Okay.
Sometimes.
The gentleman there has been waiting patiently. Yeah.
My name is Andrea Giannotti, and I work with Novamont, who is the largest bioplastics manufacturer in the world. I heard a number of statements about how bioplastics are. There's a lack of standard. There's claims which are not that precise about how really biodegradable these products are. I heard that they are pricey, or at least 2 or 3 times as expensive. Or more expensive than traditional plastics. Now, a number of these claims may be true, some others are debatable. I would like to invite you to Italy to come and see with your eyes what the bioplastic industry can do in terms of applications for food packaging, for biodegradable bags, in a number of different environments. So marine environment included. What can be done is quite amazing. And I think that the price issue, which is there at the moment, can be resolved with, let's say, mass scale or incentives or taxation. But it's definitely, I'm not saying the only solution, but one of the most interesting solutions, especially when plastics is in contact with food and is not going to be recycled. And I think we are all in agreement that this is not going to happen for a number of reasons. So
thank you. Anyone going to take?
Thanks for the invitation.
Is it all
I think I
expenses
just-
paid, is it? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, is it true that in Italy there is a fairly established industrial composting system?
Yes, one of the things that you said about the anaerobic digesters in the UK, which will basically sort out the compostable coffee pod before, let's say, processing the food waste. This is not the case in Italy. I don't know if anaerobic digesters in Italy are of a different standard, but basically what happens in Italy that everything that is compostable goes together with food and is a waste stream. And is recycled, is processed.
But how's
And
it, how is
Italy,
it
despite
labelled correctly?
despite organized crime, Italy is a country where the let's say the statistics in terms of separate collection, I mean, are of waste are amazingly high, probably among the highest in Europe. Second, probably only to Germany, but Germany incinerates a lot, which I don't think, and I think we are all in agreement, is the right solution to recover these materials. Is a waste. We are basically creating energy, I agree, but at a price. Plus we pollute because there's still a dioxin, which is released in the air. So I don't know if it is the most efficient way to get rid of our waste.
I'm on slightly shaky ground because I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to the Italian waste system, but I know that there's been a big increase, I think, in food waste collection. And I think what Catherine was talking about earlier is that a lot of what we put in those bins, if you have a collection like that at home, has different, less sort of picky requirements when it comes to being processed, and that a lot of other waste that would be from bioplastics, etc., is screened out because it takes much longer. So essentially, even though we're, as a household, you're putting it in the right bin, it's getting sort of pushed out anyway.
Yep, it is, and I don't know, is this working? Yeah. I think also the issue is that there's just no way of telling. Like a green PLA straw looks exactly like a plastic straw. So with the best will in the world, we have no way for those AD plants, unless we were to get rid of all of the real plastic alternatives. So we knew there were only bioplastics. But even we did a project with Shambhala Festival to get these reusable plates going. And they have a specific requirement that their traders can only buy in biodegradable or compostable packaging. And when you sit down with their waste guy, who is a really, really forward-thinking waste collector, and say to him, so what happens to this? And he says, it's being screened out. So you've got a company like
And why was that?
Because for various reasons it's contaminated with food, or it's the wrong mix. So some of the AD plants, if they were to get in loads and loads of the packaging, it disturbs the balance of what's in the AD plant. So I do think all of these things can be changed, but the reality is that the end-of-life systems are just not there for bioplastics. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't go down that route. We should keep going down it because at least it hasn't got fossil fuels in it, etc., etc. But it's not solved at the minute.
Just one thing to add to that, in the UK we really don't have the collection infrastructure for food waste, so it's only, I think, around 40% of councils don't collect food waste at all, so we just haven't got the infrastructure there at scale.
But some are actually stopping it, aren't they? Because it's expensive actually to collect food.
Yeah,
It's
and
not
council
what you
budgets.
get out of the bins is worth less than it costs you to provide that collection service. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But there are some interesting technologies. So I was at Sheffield Hallam University, and they've got an on-site compost that's got a big paddle in it, and they put 100 kilos a day in it, and it's gone within 24 hours into just wastewater. Now, I do think there's a thing that you could probably do something with the water that was better, but even chicken bones and everything is just dealt with on site. So they pay a fee to have it leased. They've obviously replaced what they would normally pay to have it collected, and you haven't got all of these vans shipping food waste around. So I think the idea of...
Where does it end up?
So everything turns into water.
Right.
Through enzymes and things that I'm not clever enough to understand.
Right.
But
And then
I
it
saw
gets
it.
dumped in the sewers, but it works, does it? Doesn't
Yeah, well, it's not like one of those macerators, which doesn't help, but it
Right.
genuinely turns into water. That it has a sort of spray water that keeps it moist, and then these clever things eat it all up and turn it into water. Which I think ultimately, if you At the minute, it's just going down the pipes, but I think potentially, I did email the company to ask them whether it's nutrient-rich water, because if you had a farm, you could have a circular system where you were doing something useful with that water. But it's just more the concept that you can actually start, with technology, you probably can start dealing with waste on site rather than shipping it around, which obviously adds to
It's fascinating. It's great that this room is full, that people are actually wanting to know the answers to these questions now. I've sort of tried writing stories about this, and they've got very little, sometimes been spiked, had a nib, or people now actually they're more likely to make, because my editors realise that people are waking up. Do you think that actually the general person is asking more questions about, hang on, I put this in my bin, where is it going? Are people actually reading the stuff more? I think people are. I don't know what you think.
I think the revelation that since 2012, I think we had been sending 2/3 of our plastic waste to China, was a really big moment in the realisation, not only in terms of the scale of use of throwaway plastic, but also the fact that actually our recycling system cannot cope anywhere close to this volume of stuff, and people are absolutely waking up therefore to this idea that there is no way when we throw it away, and the combination of is sort of connecting the dots between what you might have seen on your TV screen in terms of the lethal impacts of this sort of pollution on marine sea life, for example, and to the things that you have in your home, and how difficult it is to not have those things in your home because you're just busy, you're just doing your shopping. So I think that was a really key moment, and I think that just very recently Greenpeace had an investigation around the fact that brands of packaging that familiar to the shelves of supermarkets in the UK had been found in dump sites in Malaysia, and council recycling bags had been found. I think of Tesco's Finest Crisps packets, Yo Valley yogurt pot, the tub of Flora had been found, and I think that's, especially when we hear again and again, oh, ocean plastic pollution, that's not a problem for us. That's a distant problem. That's happening in countries that don't have waste recycling systems. Well, we're shipping our waste there.
But again, isn't that a problem to do with a lack of regulation ensuring that when stuff arrives in a country, that's that country's problem? It's meant to be going there to be recycled, and for some reason those items that you found, I don't know what percentage of the total waste that was exported to Malaysia actually ended up not being recycled properly as you found, but I'm sure you could go to anywhere and find a few items. But do you disagree with the basic principle that we're a globally trading nation? A lot of the stuff comes in from China and other places. The plastic is made there. We don't sell them very much. Empty shipping containers going back to those countries. What an efficient thing to do, to actually put plastic, which can be recycled, and other items in those containers, and send them back for processing, as long as it's done properly. But I know that the Greenpeace suggests that it's all being done. It's all a bad idea.
No, I think that
it should all be recycled here in Britain, and you've got to give that impression. But isn't that it's a bit of a distortion, that, isn't it?
I think the sort of the crux of the problem is that you're incentivized to export, and when you're exporting plastic waste, you do that based on the overall amount, not how much is proven to be recycled. So it's actually much cheaper just to ship it away. And what we're finding, and the Environment Agency is investigating, is whether or not this waste is actually being recycled. So I think it comes back to responsibility again. So if you don't actually have any formal responsibility as a producer and manufacturer, that if you make something that has to be disposed of, it's your responsibility to pay for what happens to it. And that's the sort of essence of how the system is broken at the moment, and that's absolutely why we want the government to sort of, in a wholesale fashion, reform this idea of producer responsibility, so that actually, because if you're a producer of plastic packaging, you're very close to being a polluter of plastic packaging, and to sort of shift that away from covering just 10% of the cost to covering the full cost, the life cycle of what happens to it. So that's where it has to start.
Fair enough.
Are we sending things because it's cheap, can I just say?
Sorry?
Aren't we just sending things over there because it's the cheapest? So someone bid for a contract and it was just the cheapest. So it's not through some altruistic, hey, we're all supporting you in this great global economy. It's cheap.
what we sell to Saudi Arabia has got nothing to do with us. I mean, just to pick up your point, I mean, we need a fundamental change in the way that our society, our civilized society, inverted commas, has to arrange its affairs. You know, we have shared responsibility for what goes on in Malaysia, Indonesia, and China.
I agree with you, but actually perhaps it could be solved better regulation in both countries, both the exporting country and the importing country. So there's a gentleman over here.
Yes, you've discussed for the last hour, you've discussed the problem in great detail. What's the best solution that each of you think is out there at the moment? I know the answer, but I've got to...
Are you not going to tell us? Can you tell us your solution first?
Well, I think waste to energy is the best solution because the problem's so big. It's impossible to reduce consumption. It's impossible for developing countries to charge 5p per bag and everything else. You need to really use plastic as a fuel. And there are some technologies out there which can do that. For instance, turning plastic into hydrogen, end-of-use tires into hydrogen already. But they just don't seem, we seem to be focused on the problem rather than potential solution, just as this conversation has.
Right. So you think the answer is to burn plastic to generate energy?
Yeah, hydrogen.
Right. Okay.
So I'd say in terms of developing countries, we've actually seen them leading the way on a lot of plastic issues. They were some of the first ones to ban plastic bags, particularly in the global south, because of huge problems linked to flooding, pollution, and we're seeing similar progress also on other plastic items. We would be very concerned with waste to energy for the same reasons that Eleanor outlined, the climate impacts, the toxin impacts as well. And also just a lock-in it provides to very high production of plastics and single-use materials in general, and all the problems associated with extraction and the resources used in those products.
And your best solution?
My best solution would be moving a much bigger shift towards reusable and refillable packaging.
Yeah, exactly. It's about reducing it at source and shifting to. It's about a total rethink about the way that we package food. And I think, let's not discount ingenuity. Let's not discount technological advances and innovation. There's huge potential, and that we freely admit that we don't have all the solutions, but we're clearly producing just a stunning amount of this stuff, far too much of this stuff. So the solution has to meet the cause of the problem, and the cause is purely the volume and its projected increase. And just another sort of point on some of these developing economies where you have huge multinational companies putting into the market lots of things like sachets. I don't know if anyone saw the Drowning in Plastic programme, putting loads of sachets out in these countries that have no waste management systems at all. So in terms of corporate responsibility, corporate irresponsibility, that's a huge issue. And one that's really important. That and they're able to do that, with impunity, really, because they're not, the bill doesn't come to them.
They're also making a fortune out of it because they say it's for people on low incomes to be able to manage their budgets, but milliliter per milliliter, they're paying way more for the tiny sachet. So it's really not good.
And what's your best solution?
I don't think there is one best solution, and I think that's the problem. I think everyone wants the magic bullet, and I think it's a million little changes. It's everything from all of you thinking, how can I consume less? It's you thinking, how can I go out and price check reusable cups for my venue rather than disposable ones. It's all of us, and we are very privileged people here, and I know everyone's busy. I'm a working mum. We can all make those little changes. It's me working with supermarkets trying to get them to do little things. It's people, how they change the narrative. It's Attenborough with his things. It's then George Monbiot coming up saying Attenborough's not doing enough and actually he's giving everyone a free pass. It's you agitating from the side. It's everything.
Okay. You asked us all for the best solution. I personally would. I think that more responsibility should be put on the consumer and households to do the right thing. I think any time that any council tries to run checks on what people do, if people are contaminating their bins, they put in these systems, they try and educate. I've seen it in people who share the flats that I've got a flat in Hackney. The state of our bins is absolutely atrocious, and they're all very well educated, well-paid people who live in those flats. But the Daily Mail will say it's the bin police. Well, I say, okay.
That's the problem.
Bin. Let's have some bin police. Sorry. Right. This lady here.
Sorry, can I just say on that point,
Yeah.
the big reason why I don't think that works, and I think you just see it if you go out into the countryside, is fly tipping. You know, I think
Right.
fly tipping is a really good metaphor for what goes on with what we're doing with China, sending out all our rubbish out there. And I think the reason it doesn't work, you know, putting the punishment on not putting stuff in the bins, is that there's always going to be people that are just not going to do it, and they'll just dump it. You know, like, you know, I live by the beach, I live by, you know, woods, and it's dumped in the woods, and it's by the beach. Oh, sorry. I think that if you... Is it on? Yeah, okay. I think that if you focus too much on putting the costing and the punishment on the disposable side of things, people just don't do it. And I think what we really need to do is put the responsibility on the people who are making money out of all of this, so it's on the producers. I completely agree we need a massively tiered approach, but I think just as a moral principle, these big companies, they're making all of this money out of, you know, foisting all of this packaging on us. And they're the ones that should pay for it. They're making the profit. They're the ones that are making, you know, incredibly huge sums of money. And yes, it would be, we should all take individual responsibilities, and those that care do. But I think that if we took out this whole, you know, like this complicated system they put in around, you know, landfill tax and all that kind of stuff, that's been shown, it doesn't really work, because everyone sort of, it all comes down to profit. So we've just got to make it about each sort of purchasing decision. There's an element of that goes to dealing with the disposable of the end life of that product, and that should go through everything, not just small items from grocers, but it should be the big electrical items and everything. So if everything is costed into it at the point of sale, the disposal, I think that, you know, that's the...
You think people will then do the right thing?
No, I don't. I don't think they will. But the company should then be responsible for paying for that cleanup, and so, you know, they should be.
But then you see, then when I buy a product, the company will have sort of spread that cost of paying for the cleanup of the selfish people, the lazy people, and I'll have to pay a contribution towards that, even if I'm making every effort to do the right thing. But that's okay. You think I should have to pay that?
I think it's just reality.
So, say that again. Yeah, okay.
I think it's reality as well.
This lady here. We've got about, how much? We've got about 10 minutes? Yeah.
Are there any signs that big investors are beginning to pressurize retailers, the big players, in a corporate social way, in the way that ethical screening has been done for armaments, for modern day slavery, etc.? Is plastic wastage becoming an issue for investors? Is it on their radar screen yet?
Yeah, it's definitely at its early stages, but becoming an issue in the same way that climate has been an issue from an investment perspective. We now see alliances of investors looking at how they can have responsible investment around plastic pollution issues as well. So it's in its early stages, but beginning.
Lady here.
I just wondered what the panel think of education. I recently was working on a project for the Green School in Bali. I don't know if you are aware of that school. It's a school that educates through sustainability. They use the vegetable oil to run their buses. There is no plastic anywhere in the entire school. And these children, there's about 450 children there. They are educated from a very, very early age to understand exactly what we're all talking about. And hopefully there will be some more green schools around the world. But I just wondered, in your daily lives, I mean, how much do you do in the education world to drive these kids at these early ages to be little pioneers and sort of the green leaders of the future, perhaps, and bring in a whole new support for what we're doing?
There are some really exciting things going on at school. There's a really great campaigning group called Kids Against Plastic, And Greenpeace does have speakers that go into schools, but actually this is an issue that kids have really just taken, and they understand it at an intuitive level. That, you know, precious creatures are dying, and I think like that's one example, and we get contacted quite a lot of other examples as well. So I think it's fantastic, and I think again and again we see whether it's just schools or individuals or communities, these are some of the places where leadership is really blossoming when it comes to whether plastic-free communities, etc. And it comes down to sort of doing your bit and what your bit looks like. And I guess the missing piece is that we don't think companies or government are really doing their bit yet to sort of echo back that enthusiasm that can start at a really early age.
I do loads of work with schools. We've always had people, kids coming into the shop, going out and speaking to schools, and this is why I go to a lot of packaging industry events. And it's really old and tired, and everyone's saying, oh, nobody understands that if you shrink wrap a cucumber, it's going to last 10 days longer. And you've got to say to them that the kids coming up through schools, you know, they are your employees of tomorrow, they're your customers of tomorrow, to the retailers, you know, they're all, I don't 100% believe this whole thing about millennials and their obsession with transparency, but it is changing. There is a change amongst younger people who want to know more about where things come from. And I would like to think that that's going to continue helping this cause.
Sorry, and you don't think that shrink wrapping cucumbers is a good idea?
It is, but the question is should you be eating a cucumber in December?
That's
the question.
But we should be shrink wrapping them because they will last longer.
It's really hard. If you've got a cucumber locally, you wouldn't need to shrink wrap it. If it's going to be transported in from Spain over 5 days, you need to shrink wrap it. But the Friends of the Earth Europe report shows that obviously I'm not in any way saying that there isn't a link between packaging and food waste, and things packaged properly do reduce food waste, but the rise in food waste has mirrored the rise in packaging. So this idea that it is totally stopping food waste isn't as true as the packaging industry would make it sound.
Hi. Given what Ben said at the beginning about how little we know about what impact there is on plastics in the ocean, do you think this issue occupies an appropriate kind of market share of public interest in the environment? And
I think it is a huge issue within ever-mounting scientific evidence of what the impacts are, particularly in terms of microplastics that they're found in every marine habitat, in sea ice, on the seabed, and that they can be ingested up and travel up through the food chain along with toxins. And so I think there's been some concern around, is it diverting public opinion and concern away from issues such as climate change? I don't think that it's people care about one thing or another in environmental issues. So I think there's space for both, and it's definitely a gateway for increasing public awareness on environmental issues in general, and for leading to more environmentally sustainable practices across the board.
We've got time for a couple more. A lady here, and then we'll go over there.
Hi, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I'm talking about climate change. Is there a way you think using technology and possibly advanced data analytics to track the overall carbon footprint of packaging, so that things that perhaps appear sustainable aren't actually being shipped thousands of miles or disposed of in unsustainable ways, such as cardboard, which I know nothing about. And also, once, if that is possible, do you think there's any worth of putting kind of what was done for foods and calories, like a little system where green is good and red is bad, and would people kind of buy into that?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. I didn't quite catch it.
Is there a way of calculating the overall carbon footprint of packaging in general, using possibly advanced data analytics?
It'd be hard to differentiate it from the product, wouldn't it, itself? I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's just one indicator as well. It's going to be really hard to track packaging that's essentially worthless. You know, a cardboard box, how are you going to put an RFID tag? in something like that. So I think it's going to be quite hard. But I think we were talking this morning at Food Matters Live about life cycle analysis. You know, there is potentially the point that you're never going to be able to prove that a reusable through just a pure life cycle analysis is better than a single use. Does that mean you should keep using the single use, or is it part of a much bigger story that we as humanity need to deal with, that gets across this: we've got to consume less, consume better, consume differently, because resources are going to start running out? So I think if you just look at carbon metrics, it's probably quite hard, and it's a very difficult message to the consumer. And I think the whole kind of on-pack labelling is hard. I probably don't know enough about it to say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it would be really challenging to do it.
Okay. There was a lady. Is a lady over there?
So I think it was about 20 years ago, maybe more, in Germany. And I don't mean to say this in a sexist way, but I remember the story. German housewives said enough of enough packaging and stood in the supermarket and ripped the packaging off the products and left them there in the corner, and it started a movement of supermarkets going, actually no, we're not going to do this, because they were left with piles and piles of rubbish. And I'd just love that to start here. And
they did. You know, the Women's Institute did it. It was about when I was starting out, so 2005 or something. It was their campaign. And the problem is in Germany, where they did it, there was a legal obligation that the supermarket had to do something with it. And so anyone that's tried to do it over here, they just get these poorly paid people at a checkout going, you know, they're not empowered to do anything with it. So I love it, but I don't think it's a protest, and it's great as a protest. But I don't know
in
if it's
a way now this year.
Yeah,
so
people are doing it. People do it, and they post sort of live streams of themselves on Facebook. I can't remember what it's called.
Plastic Attack, and I've got a slightly different take on it, because at Greenpeace we actually we had a weekend called the Shoppers Revolt, where we encourage shoppers to do exactly that, to do your shopping as usual, and then pick the unwanted plastic packaging once you've been through the till and leave it there and explain why. We've also been contacted by lots of people that work in supermarkets who are really frustrated with plastic packaging as well. And, you know, they understand that their bosses are the ones that are going to make the big decisions, and that this is a really good way for customers to use their voice and actually say, hello, I'm a loyal customer, and I want you to do this differently, and I want you to reduce your plastic, because you're giving me no choice but to pass loads of it over the till and take it home with me. Well, actually, it's your responsibility, and I'm literally going to hand it back to you. And it's sort of like, it's coming off the back of you know, it's not a newfangled tactic. It's quite an effective one. And there's other groups rising up and doing stuff called plastic attack groups that are actually a global movement. And I think it is, you know, we've talked a little bit about what individuals can do. I think the most powerful thing that we can do, given that sort of limited at what we can do in terms of our own sort of swapping single use for reusable, is to use our voice and to challenge companies or governments, whether it's writing to your supermarket, whether it's taking stuff off of the till, signing petitions, etc., that actually I want it to change, and no, actually I demand it to change. And the change happens at that point. It happens with you. I've had enough. So, yeah.
Well, that's a nice way of ending, and maybe we could each of us, and I'll start, sort of say things that we're doing to try and reduce our plastic consumption. So what I try and do is refuse bottled water of any kind. Say tap water is perfectly fine for me in any situation. And when I go to supermarkets, don't eat when you're getting loose fruit and veg, comes in its own natural packaging. You don't even need to take these flimsy little bags. Just put it straight on the till and it goes through. And if they have to weigh each carrot, fair enough. So anyway, that's what I do. Not very imaginative, I know. Any ideas?
I don't have a huge amount of imagination. I feel like I've sort of done. I feel like I've done a lot that I can do, but whether that's my reusable bottle, coffee cup, or, you know, trying to buy loose where I can and not buying cling film, buying beeswax. But there is a sort of, you know, I think, you know, the main thing that I do is that I lead a campaign that's calling on major supermarkets to reduce their plastic footprint, because ultimately we reach a point where we reach the limit, and you know we need the rest to be unlocked for us. So.
Fine. So, do you do anything imaginative to reduce your plastic consumption?
I'm delighted that I've got an independent unpackaged shop that's open nearby. So now on a weekly basis I can go and buy laundry products and other goods without any packaging.
And do you do that? Do you actually go with your own bottle and put up some detergent?
Absolutely, and for my colleagues.
Impressive.
I love how you sound so surprised.
It's been based on that.
I think two things. I think support local shops. So all of the local shops on your high street need support, and they all want to sell you things. So you can go to a butcher, and you can. Obviously not if you're vegan, which is obviously a whole other climate change discussion. But you know, there are lots of ways of going to a local shop, not when they're busy, but just saying, I would really like to buy these products off you with no packaging. I'm going to bring in my own packaging. Can we just work out how to make this work? And they'll go, yeah, great. And then you say, maybe you put a sign up in your window. And it's about supporting local shops. I also think stop giving yourself a free pass. And I totally hold my hand up, my colleague Hannah over there. I used to, like, when I'm working really hard at the minute, and I love a sugar fix at the end of the afternoon. And I always used to give myself a free pass to buy like a snack somewhere. And then I said, Natalie from City to Sea did a whole piece on just how awful, and it was a real reminder of, hang on a second, like I think I'm doing really well because my entire life is committed to this, but I give myself a free pass on times where I shouldn't, and we're all privileged enough to not give ourselves free passes all of the time.
Great. Look, I just wanted, it's 8:30. I'm sure you've all got other things to do tonight, so please just join me in thanking our three speakers. Thank you. Get used to this.